Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be doing a 2028 Democratic primary prediction. So I've picked out 7 candidates for today: Gavin Newsom, AOC, Pete Buttigieg, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, Andy Beshear, and Raphael Warnock. And I think these are probably the 7 most likely people to run for the nomination. And let's get started right away. And our first primary state is going to be New Hampshire. And I think in New Hampshire, Pete Buttigieg will come out as the winner in New Hampshire. It'll be very close. I think someone like Shapiro will become in second, and then some more progressive people like Gavin Newsom and AOC will go behind them, and then Whitmer, Raphael Warnock, and Andy Beshear. And now we have Pete Buttigieg winning the first primary, so that will give him lots of momentum, just like he did in 2020 when he won the first primary of Iowa. And next up we have South Carolina. And in South Carolina, I think Raphael Warnock gets a giant chunk of the vote because he's from a neighboring state and he does really well with Black religious voters, and I think he will just be able to get that South Carolina Democratic base. And I think someone like Newsom comes in second because he's been doing a lot of events in South Carolina. He's been getting name recognition up there. And then I've got Andy Beshear also because he is a somewhat southern governor of a red state, and I think he could appeal to South Carolina voters. And then we've got some people like Shapiro, and then Buttigieg. I don't think he would do very well because he's not very popular with Black voters. And then we'll give AOC some votes and give Whitmer a few. Next up, we have Nevada. And in Nevada, I think it would be very close between Gavin Newsom and AOC, but I think ultimately Gavin Newsom would pull ahead of AOC. And I think just because Nevada has a very progressive Las Vegas base, and I think Gavin Newsom and AOC would do well appealing to them. And then I think Pete Buttigieg would come in third because he has a pretty well national profile from running in 2020. And then I think Warnock would do somewhat well because he could get some votes from the Latino community, and then Shapiro, Beshear, and Whitmer would all be behind them. Next up, we have Michigan, and Michigan is Gretchen Whitmer's home state, so I do think she would win there by a good chunk. But I think Buttigieg and Shapiro would also get a decent chunk of votes because they're from the Midwest and they're very popular in the Midwest. And then I think Warnock would do well getting Black voters in Detroit, and then AOC would get a decent chunk of the progressive vote. And then I think Andy Beshear would also get some votes, and I don't think Gavin Newsom would fare well in Michigan. So those are the first 4 primaries, and it's a pretty close race, and I don't think anyone would drop out at this point because everybody has at least a good chunk of delegates. So I think everybody would stick in the race, and because we have Super Tuesday up next, which is a ton of primaries. And so we're just going to go alphabetically just like on this list. So we're going to start with Alabama. And in Alabama, I think Warnock would win because he will get the Black votes and he's very popular down in the South. And Warnock will be followed by Beshear because Beshear is also down there in the South. And then we've got people like Newsom. He's got good name recognition. Shapiro, Buttigieg, and I think AOC would get some votes, but not the most. And then we've got Whitmer in last place. Now we've got American Samoa, and in American Samoa, I think Warnock would do quite well, getting some of the minority vote. And then I think AOC would also grab some vote, and then Newsom. And now to Arkansas. Arkansas, Warnock again. It's just Warnock is going to be very popular in the South, and I think he's going to do quite well in that region. And I think Beshear will do well too, followed by some other candidates: Newsom, Shapiro, Buttigieg, AOC, and Whitmer. And now to California. And this is Gavin Newsom's home state, so I do think he's going to win it, but not by the most impressive margin. I think AOC will get a decent chunk of the vote, and then followed by some Midwesterners like Buttigieg, Shapiro. Beshear might get a few. Warnock will get some minority vote, and then Gretchen Whitmer will get a few votes. And now after California, we have Colorado. And Colorado is somewhat progressive, but I think they would like a candidate like Pete Buttigieg, so I think Pete Buttigieg would win, followed by some more progressive people. And I think, in Colorado, like some of these, I just don't think Gretchen Whitmer is going to get a decent chunk of the vote. I don't think she's very different from other Midwestern people like Buttigieg and Shapiro. I do think Beshear would get a few, Shapiro would get a few, and then Warnock would get some of the black minority vote. And then we move on to Iowa, and Pete Buttigieg won this state in 2020, and I think he will do it again. And I think following Buttigieg will be someone like Shapiro. I think he will be popular. And then Newsom, Beshear, AOC, Warnock, and Whitmer. Now we have Maine, and in Maine, I think Buttigieg will be quite popular, and another Midwesterner like Shapiro would be popular, and then AOC and Newsom would get some progressive vote, and then I think Whitmer would do okay, and then I think Beshear and Warnock would be in last. And now Massachusetts. I think in Massachusetts, Newsom would do quite well. He wouldn't win by the greatest margin, but I think he would do well in a very liberal state of Massachusetts. And I think we have some followers, people from the Midwest like Buttigieg, Shapiro, and I think Beshear would get some votes, and then Whitmer and Warnock would also get a few. Now we have Minnesota, and in Minnesota I think Buttigieg would do well. He's got his Midwestern appeal, and Minnesota's pretty Midwestern, and I think Newsom would get some votes, AOC as well, because Minnesota's a decently liberal state. I think Shapiro would get a decent chunk, and then I think Whitmer would get a few, Beshear would get some, and Warnock would get some. Now moving on to North Carolina. In North Carolina, I think Warnock would win. He does very well with black voters, and I don't see anybody beating him. But I think Beshear would also do quite well because he's from that region. And I think followed by some progressive vote for Newsom and AOC, and then some Midwesterners like Buttigieg, Shapiro, and Whitmer. Now we are going to go to Oklahoma. We are more than halfway through the Super Tuesday states. And in Oklahoma, I think Beshear would get his first state by a narrow margin because Oklahoma is pretty close to Kentucky, and I think Beshear would fare well in Oklahoma, followed by Warnock and some progressive vote from Newsom and AOC, and then people like Buttigieg, Shapiro, and Whitmer. Now in Tennessee, I think even though this is a neighbor to Kentucky where Andy Beshear is from, I think Warnock will do well, followed by Beshear, and Newsom will get some of his name recognition. People like Buttigieg, Shapiro, and I think AOC and Whitmer will get a few. Now in Texas, I do think Gavin Newsom would win. Not by a lot. I think it'd be a very close race between Newsom, Warnock, and Buttigieg. And then AOC would get some very progressive vote, and Beshear, Shapiro, and Whitmer would get a few. Now we are going to move to Utah, and Utah is a very progressive state, so I do think AOC is going to win, followed by Buttigieg, then Newsom, and Warnock, Beshear, Shapiro, and Whitmer will get some. Now we go to Vermont, and I think AOC would win Vermont. She will be endorsed by Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is from Vermont, and Vermont is a very progressive state, and I think Newsom will be behind her, and someone like Buttigieg, Warnock, Shapiro, Beshear. Now we've got Virginia, and in Virginia, I think Warnock would win. Virginia is pretty close to the South, and I think he would get support from black voters in Virginia. And then I've got Buttigieg, AOC, Beshear, Shapiro, all behind. And now this is the end of Super Tuesday. This is all the Super Tuesday states, and I think we would see some dropouts at this point, like Gretchen Whitmer only won her home state, Andy Beshear only Oklahoma, and Shapiro has not won any states yet. So I think Whitmer, Shapiro, and Beshear will all drop out after Super Tuesday. I think Beshear and Whitmer will endorse Pete Buttigieg. Now we've got those endorsements all set, and now it's really a four-way race between Newsom, AOC, Buttigieg, and Warnock. Now we're going to go quickly through all the rest of the states, and we're going to go Hawaii, and I think AOC will win Hawaii, followed by Newsom, Buttigieg, and Warnock. And now we go to Democrats abroad. Again, I think AOC would win, Newsom would get a good share, Buttigieg would too, and Warnock would. Now we go to Georgia, Warnock's home state. He does very well, followed by Buttigieg, Newsom, and AOC gets some votes. Now Mississippi, and again Warnock does well. It's a state from the South. Gavin Newsom, Buttigieg, AOC. And now we go to over here, and I think Newsom would do well, Buttigieg would, Warnock, and AOC. And now we go to Washington, and I think Newsom would do quite well in Washington. Buttigieg, AOC, Warnock. And in Arizona, I also think Newsom would win. And now we go to Illinois, a very liberal state, so I think Newsom would win. Pete Buttigieg would get a decent share because it's near in the Midwest. AOC would get some, and Warnock would get lots of the Detroit black vote. Now, if we go to Kansas, I think Pete Buttigieg does very well in Kansas, followed by Newsom, Warnock, and AOC. Now, if we go to Ohio, again, Midwestern state, Pete Buttigieg definitely wins, followed by Newsom, AOC, Warnock. And Louisiana, again, southern state, so I think Warnock does well, Newsom gets some, Pete Buttigieg gets some, and AOC doesn't get that much. Now, Missouri, I think it'd be a tight race between Buttigieg and Warnock, but I think Buttigieg pulls ahead. And in North Dakota, I think Buttigieg will win North Dakota because it's near the Midwest. And now we go to Connecticut. And in Connecticut, very liberal state, I think Newsom does win. Pete Buttigieg a very close second. Warnock and AOC. Now we go to New York. I think Newsom barely beats Pete Buttigieg. AOC gets a decent share. Warnock gets some. And now we go to Rhode Island. And in Rhode Island, I think Buttigieg will pull ahead narrowly against Newsom. Warnock will do well. AOC will get some. And now we go to Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, I think Pete Buttigieg gets a majority of the vote. And Warnock in it. So now we can take a pause, and AOC has not been doing so hot in the previous states. So I think this is the point where she is going to drop out. And I think AOC is going to endorse Raphael Warnock. And that gives a huge boost to Warnock's delegate vote. So now it's a three-way race. Newsom, Warnock, and Buttigieg. It's very close. And now we go to Alaska. I think Buttigieg wins Alaska. Newsom behind. And Warnock gets a good share. Now if we go to Wyoming, I think Buttigieg does well. Newsom trails him. And Warnock gets a few votes. Pennsylvania, again, I think Midwestern state, Buttigieg does really well. Gavin Newsom gets some votes, and Warnock gets a few. Now we go to Puerto Rico, and I think Newsom will win in Puerto Rico. Buttigieg will do well, and Warnock will get a decent share. Indiana, Midwestern state, Buttigieg will win. He actually was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, so I think he's going to do quite well. I think Newsom will trail, and Warnock will get a few votes. In Maryland, I think Newsom will do well. Warnock will get some votes because there's a decent black population there. And Nebraska, again, these are similar to the states Buttigieg has been winning, so I think Buttigieg will do well, followed by Newsom and Warnock. Now, West Virginia, I think it's a very tight race between Buttigieg and Warnock, but I think Warnock pulls ahead. And now Kentucky, I do think Buttigieg does well. Newsom and Warnock both get a decent share. Oregon, you know it. Newsom is going to win Oregon. It's next to California. Buttigieg will follow. And Warnock will get a few votes. Now, if we go to Idaho, I think Buttigieg wins. Close second, Gavin Newsom. And then Warnock just behind them. Now, if we go to D.C., D.C. has a good black population, so I think Warnock wins, narrowly defeating Gavin Newsom. And Montana, Buttigieg, Newsom, and Warnock. New Jersey, I think Newsom pulls ahead narrowly against Pete Buttigieg, and Warnock comes in last. And now Delaware, also the same. Newsom narrowly beats Buttigieg. And Warnock trails. New Mexico, also near California. Border state, I think Newsom narrowly beats Pete Buttigieg. And in Florida, I think Newsom does quite well in Florida. Buttigieg in second, and then Warnock. Now, South Dakota. I think Buttigieg does quite well in South Dakota, followed by Newsom and Warnock. And now in Guam. Guam, I think, is very liberal, and Newsom would win, followed by Buttigieg and Warnock. In Virgin Islands, I think Warnock does win. It's got a good, decent share of black population. And now that is all the states filled out for the primary. And right now, it's actually a very close race. You've got Gavin Newsom at about 1,100, Pete Buttigieg about 1,100, and if you add up the endorsements, Pete Buttigieg is at about 1,300, and Warnock will be at about 1,200 with the endorsements. So here's what I think. I think it may come down to the superdelegates at the convention, but I don't think so. I think Raphael Warnock is going to tell both candidates, I'll endorse you if you make me VP. And I think Pete Buttigieg is going to take that offer up right away, because Pete Buttigieg needs help from black voters because he does not do well, and Warnock as his VP would greatly help him with that. So I think Warnock endorses Pete Buttigieg in exchange for a VP spot. And so that means Buttigieg will be the nominee for 2028 for the Democratic Party and will go on to the general election. All right, thanks for sticking around for that long video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please comment. I would love to hear your thoughts.